most of the time when Trinitarians and non-Trinitarians, argue over who Jesus is, they almost never go to Isaiah 9. And, well, they sometimes, but it's by comparison. I mean, the preferred text is obviously something like John 1:1 or something much more involved with, well, it's become involved with grammar and things. I think it's actually very simple, just like Jesus talks about in John 10. We'll get to it. But my point is, Isaiah 9:6 is just not brought up that much. And yet, it refers to someone as mighty God, at least in the Hebrew, Masoretic and Dead Sea Scroll texts. So, that's a significant reference, as are the others. But my point is, people will go to John 1:1 and argue about it. They'll argue about the NWT and using a God or lowercase g. And yet here, there's no a and there's no lowercase g. So why is that? Why do you think that might be? Well, we're not going to get into the issues as far as the debaters are concerned, but I think it has a lot to do with their interest in arguing. So otherwise, why not go to this clear text and talk about it? Because I think it, like other texts, actually make it very easy to talk about. Because we don't have to get into any real grammatical issues. We do have a couple textual issues. But let's read the text as it's translated in the NWT, basically from the Masoretic text. But we have the Dead Sea Scroll text here, and we can discuss any significant variants. But I'm not going to get in. There's not many, if any, of significance. And so I don't see an issue with reading from the NWT and discussing both the Masoretic and Dead Sea Scroll text. And then we'll get to the Greek texts in a moment. All right, let's read our primary texts, Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. I understand they're part of a larger context, and we are going to consider some of that. But let's just read Isaiah 9, 6, and 7 first. And then from there, we're going to read just a couple other texts a little bit lower. But first of all, Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. For there has been a child born to us. There has been a son given to us. And the princely rule will come to be on his shoulder. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. Verse 7. To the abundance of the princely rule and to peace, there will be no end. Upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, in order to establish it firmly and to sustain it by means of justice and by means of righteousness, from now on and to time indefinite. The very zeal of Jehovah of armies will do this. Now, let's jump down to just a few verses below in Isaiah 11. And let's read another portion of the book of Isaiah that seems connected with what we just read. We're going to read Isaiah 11, 1 through 9. And then we're going to go back and talk about it. Okay, let's read this. This is very important here. We're not going to so much get into the technical aspects or the text of Isaiah 11. It's also represented, though, in the Isaiah scroll. So there's no issue with this text, but it talks about things very much like what we just read in relation to the mighty God, eternal Father, and Prince of Peace. Okay, Isaiah 11:1. There must go forth a twig out of the stump of Jesse. That's King David's father, Jesse. And remember in Isaiah 9, let's go back, 9, 6, 7. It says that the throne of David, and upon his kingdom, upon the throne of David, there would be no end, because his princely rule would come from him. And here it connects it with David as well by saying a twig out of the stump of David's father, Jesse. And out of his roots as a sprout will be fruitful. And upon him the Spirit of Jehovah must settle down. The Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of mightiness, Spirit of counsel, the Spirit of knowledge and the Spirit of the fear of Jehovah. And there will be enjoyment by him in the fear of Jehovah. And he will not judge by any mere appearance of his eyes, nor reprove simply according to the thing heard by his ears. And with righteousness, verse 4, he must judge the lowly ones and with uprightness he must give reproof on behalf of the meek ones of the earth. And he must strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the spirit of his lips he will put the wicked one to death. Verse 5, just a couple more. And righteousness must prove to be the belt of his hips, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. And the wolf will actually reside for a while with the male lamb. And with the kid, the leopard itself will lie down, and the calf, and the maned young lion, and the well-fed animal, all together. And a mere little boy will be leader over them. And the cow and the bear themselves will feed. Together their young ones will lie down, and even the lion will eat straw, just like the bull. 2 more verses. And the suckling child will certainly play upon the hole of a cobra, and upon the light aperture of a poisonous snake will a weaned child actually put his own hand. You mothers wouldn't let that happen today, I know that. Neither would we. Fathers, that is. They will not do any harm or cause any ruin in my holy mountain, because the earth will be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah, Jah, as the waters are covering the very sea. Now, this description right here we just read is very similar to what you will read if you go to Revelation chapter 20 and read to the end of chapter 22. It will describe for you the bringing forth of peace, no more death, no more sickness. Revelation 21, 1 through 4, a new heavens, a new earth, where the nations bring their glory into New Jerusalem, and where trees grow and heal the nations. Very much like this. And you know what that description in Revelation 20 through 22 that I just gave you that relates to this description here in Isaiah 11? You know what precedes that description in Revelation 20 verses 22? Look at what it says here in Isaiah 11:9. Why does all this stuff happen? Because the earth will certainly be filled with the knowledge of Jehovah as the waters are covering the very sea. Now, if you go to Revelation 19, right after the destruction of God's great enemies, right before his greatest enemy is imprisoned, you read this. Verses 1 through 6. Maybe 7 too. After these things I heard what was a loud voice of a crowd in heaven saying, Praise Jah. The salvation, the glory, and the power belong to our God, because his judgments are true. He's executed judgment on the great harlot, the terrible corrupting influence on the earth. Remember, this isn't meant to be a terrible denunciation to everyone. Both Rahab the prostitute was known as a faithful woman, and Jesus associated with people who were prostitutes. He didn't approve of that. That's not the point. My point is, usually when I read this reference to the harlot or the prostitute, I'll get an email or something from someone who says, oh, you're putting down prostitutes. That's really not the case. This is an especially corrupting influence, like that prostitute Jezebel in the Hebrew scriptures, who corrupted the earth and the kingdoms of Jah with false gods and child sacrifice and all these terrible things. So that's what you see among the nations today, that kind of disgusting harlotry, not just people who are in a weak condition. So try not to take it personal. This is about a spiritual entity or kingdom that Jah is destroying. And so right away, verse 3, a second time they say, Praise Jah. Then in verse 4, 24 elders, 4 living creatures, these heavenly beings, worship God and say, Amen, praise Jah. Then again, verse 6, I heard what was a voice of a great crowd, a sound of many waters, a sound of heavy thunders, saying, Praise Jah. Remember what was foretold in Isaiah chapter 11 about why all those things would take place. It would be because the very same thing, the knowledge of Jehovah, All of these things are consistent. And in fact, you will find in Isaiah 65, 66 a reference to a new heavens and new earth, exactly what's described in Revelation 21, and also referenced by Peter, one of Jesus' direct followers. So I'm just pointing out the consistency with these texts. I'm laying a groundwork for you in association with Isaiah 9, 6, and 7 that connects it with Isaiah 11 that talks about all these things and about the one who would be given. Did you notice what verse 2 said? The spirit of counsel and mightiness. What did it say in Isaiah 9, 6, and 7? He would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. It's the same one. This is the same one, the one who came forth through the throne of David. Right here. Is the same one who's the twig out of the stump of Jesse, David's father. And we know that's not an intervening figure because it talks about how when these things occurred, the spirit of counsel and mightiness, the spirit of knowledge and fear of Jehovah, and how he wouldn't judge the way these other people judged. These things are then connected with this other stuff that then creates an earth-wide condition that doesn't end. Just like we see in Revelation. But that doesn't mean that before that time there wouldn't be events and things that just like in Revelation, right? Anyone who's read Revelation knows that before you get to that time of peace and the new heavens, new earth, and where the Lamb is, it talks about the Lamb, the river of life flowing from God, and the Lamb. See, the Prince of Peace, he's figured as a lamb there. But not always. Earlier in Revelation, he's depicted as a terrifying spiritual being in Revelation chapter 1. The firstborn from the dead, Revelation 1:5. Very similar to the description in Daniel 10 of the one who is described as Michael, the only one who could help Gabriel in dealing with the other princes. We'll get more to that in a minute because it connects. He's called the Great Prince. One of the foremost princes, true, because the other princes existed among the nations, so they were all princes. And in fact, part of the difference in one of our texts in Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, there is an additional part in the Greek reference where it talks about first person pronoun. He says, for I will bring peace over the princes. So it does connect even this one's princely rule with other princes, like in Daniel. And in Daniel, of course, Michael is called Hasar Hagadol, the great prince of Israel, who would stand up at the end time and judge the dead and the living, including Daniel. And so now let's focus a little bit more on these texts. Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, we read them. They may be a little bit different in some texts, as I mentioned, like verse 5, in terms of the ordering. But these terms, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. So when we know this text existed before Jesus, right? Now, none of the early Christians or Jesus himself quote or apply this text to him. They quote other Isaiah texts, as I said. But they do things, and he does things that basically fulfill this text. I mean, we know that he gave counsel in almost everything he said, right? He gave a Sermon on the Mount where he gave some of the best counsel I think we've ever heard. He repeatedly helped those who were sick. He addressed those who were misleading others and corrected their viewpoint and how they were mistreating people. He did everything that these texts talk about in terms of him judging people, not by the appearance of their, right? He didn't look upon the scribes and Pharisees and others in terms of their outward appearance. He didn't look upon the temple and the arrangement and the things that Herod had built. None of that mattered to him. The only thing that mattered was Jehovah and doing the Father's will. That's it. And so the reason we see this text is beyond, for example, people like Hezekiah, is because here, if you look at Isaiah 9, 7 again, it says there'll be no end to peace. So we obviously don't have peace now entirely, and that's why we still believe these things are future in the sense that Jesus will bring about an end to the reason this continues to be not peaceful. We have other spirit sons of God who are active on the earth or in heaven, but at some point are thrown into the earth, according to Revelation, by Michael, the Archangel, and then they're brought to a finish, all the way through to Revelation chapter 20, where the devil is thrown into an unending empty pit or prison for 1,000 years, while the earth is restored by God's Son. Just like Paul teaches us in 1 Corinthians 15 about how he would be given the kingdom, he would bring an end to death, and then he would give the kingdom back to his Father, the perfect present. But the Son is the one who figures into this the most. Now let's talk about a couple texts, and then we're going to tie them together with what we read here in Isaiah 9, 6, and 7. First, let's talk about a variant reading to the Isaiah text. So, now in the Septuagint, the Greek translation, I'm going to keep this simple, and I'll put some notes below, but it's not that complicated. I can keep it, I think, pretty simple. Okay, so in the Greek translation, there are occasions where Hebrew or Aramaic texts that use the terms for God are translated by the Greek term for angels. And so, in the text of Isaiah, where in the Hebrew text, it uses the expression mighty God, which is El Gibor, the Greek text that's related to the Septuagint translation done in the 3rd century, not necessarily the later Christian copies, which may also be a part of that tradition, but were more so retained by the early Christians. And so I'm going a little bit outside of that for a moment, but I'll come to those. The Septuagint version that we use, or that we associate more so with the earliest time before the Christians, and then right during the 1st century, potentially, uses the term for angel here. Not God, not theos. And the reason the Septuagint does that often is because it's identifying who they are. Rather than leave it questionable, in some sense, because it's different from texts like Psalm 82, where it's clear that God is entering in among the gods who've been appointed among the nations, just like it says early in Psalm 81, and as we see discussed in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, that aside though, my point is that in Psalm 82, it doesn't translate that as angels, because it recognizes them as gods in their position as approved by Jah. They're not acting as angels for him there in Psalm 82. That's why he's judging them. But others are. They're not in that appointed position like the princes of Greece and Persia, to where he can enter in among them and address them for their failure to handle their own nation and how it's affecting his people, especially during that time where he's bringing forth the Messiah. All of this is under his control, and he has appointed these different spirits. Deuteronomy 32:8. And as we see in Daniel, with Michael and the princes of Greece and Persia, and Gabriel. So, the Septuagint, the Greek translation, identifies this being as an angel. As an angel who is giving counsel. And so, or an angel of counsel, who is giving counsel, basically. And here's the text, basically as you may see it in terms of the Septuagint, this upper part here. This is Codex Sinaiticus, one of our, what I was referring to earlier as more of the Christian Septuagint text, but that may basically still be representative of the earlier Septuagint text, although certain changes were made, like you see in these Septuagint texts. These Greek translations, Codex Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, and Alexandrinus, are our primary three, most well known. They'll use things like, nomina sacra, so substitutions for divine names that you see in the earlier Greek texts. You don't see those substitutions. You see the actual names. So that they had certain changes like that. And then there are other few different things, but more often than not, they're reflective of the earlier Septuagint text. So you're looking at something here. You're looking at a section from Codex Sinaiticus, okay? This part right here. This is the actual Codex Sinaiticus text, this upper part. And if you look at the top line, you go about midway through, you can see the Greek text that we're talking about, the translation, what we're doing. It says, kai kaletai. And then the second line, ta anima autu megale. This is the middle line. You see that M on the left? Megale boules angelos. So, of great counsel, the of great counsel angel, or angel of great counsel. So, and then you can see that additional part right there that I was talking to you about in terms of, or at least some of the additional text in the Greek reading. But now look, if you look below, okay, so here you can see that the Septuagint text, even in the Christian version, our earliest basically Christian version of this text in Codex Sinaiticus, dated to about the middle 300s, it says, and it will be called the name of him, of great counsel, angel. Right there, he's called an angel in this text.